All right, I'll crack my fetch.
Trigger my Mayhem Devil. I have 2 Nixilis triggers.
Oh, good lord. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things CEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, Callahan. And today we are going to be talking about my new favorite CEDH deck, Nixilis Captive Kingpin from March of the Machine Aftermath. But first, we need to pay the bills. Tickets for our latest Mox Masters tournament are on sale now. Compete for $2,000 in prizes and points towards our Mox Masters Invitational coming this October. Tickets sell out for each event, so pick up yours today. Our merchandise is available on our store. We currently have dice, coins, and a sticker pre-order, so go ahead and check all of that out at playingwithpowermtg.com and help support the channel. You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our Discord, webcam league, play days, early access to videos, names in the credits of our show, exclusive videos, the opportunity to watch our gameplay recordings live, and even the ability to be on an episode. There are tiers for everyone, so go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg and help support the show. As always, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, reach out to Ryan's wonderful email in the YouTube description or the podcast notes. Wherever you're listening, you can find Ryan.
Yes, my email is wonderful. It is a wonderful email. And speaking of Patreon, we also do a Patreon shout out in every single episode. And today's Patreon shout out goes to Mark Schaefer. Sorry if everyone mispronounces your name. It's spelled interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's go ahead and dive into today's topic, which is Cal's favorite new deck. And Cal's favorite new deck is Nixilis Captive Kingpin. So today we're going to kind of talk about the deck and what all cool things are about it. Why is it his new favorite new deck and all that kind of fun stuff. So first thing we want to do is I am just going to kind of go out and say to you, Cal, what is Nixilis Captive Kingpin? Where did it come from? What does it do? And why did it interest you?
Yeah, so Nixilis Captive Kingpin's kind of a weird card. I kind of first ran into it because I was working on writing articles for TCG Player, and they kind of wanted me to check out a card from March of the Machine Aftermath, which was kind of a weird set, kind of a bonus set. First time they tried to do a really small set in a really long time. It didn't seem to go all that well from the perspective of many consumers. But one of the interesting things about the set was it did have a lot of interesting legendary creature designs in it. And a lot of people had been talking about Nixilis, so I decided I'd give them a try. And what is it that brought me to Nixilis? Well, let's just read you the card first. This is Nixilis Captive Kingpin. He will cost you 2 generic, a black and a red. So this is a Rakdos card. He is a legendary creature demon. And then first up, he has flying and trample. So a 4-drop Flampler. We're already off to a great start here. Whenever one or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Nixilis Captive Kingpin. Exile the top card of your library until your next end step. You may play that card. And then he is a 4/3. So a couple things. Number one, a 4/3 flying trampler for 4 that's a pretty crazy stat line, even in our world of Commander where, everyone's starting with 40 life. I would have to hit my opponents, 40 times to actually kill them, right? At floor. But, it's shocking how quickly this gets out of hand. There's a couple things to note. Like I said, it says 1 or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life. So if all of your opponents are losing 1 life all at the same time, Nixilis does only trigger once. And then it says play, not cast. So you can play lands that you exile off of Nixilis, even if there's a Draenith Magistrate on the battlefield, which has come up many a time for me already. I know that has been a thorn in Ryan's side more than once. It
really has been.
And then also, much the way as one of my last favorite CDH decks worked, Prosper, the cards are just given the innate ability to be played until your next end step. So even if Nixilis gets removed or whatever, you will still be able to play those cards. Also of note, it's your next end step. So if you're exiling cards on your turn, as the Ob Nixilis player, you have a very limited window of time to use those cards. I'm a really big fan of the card. It's such a unique design that I was immediately drawn to it.
To say that this card is pushed is an understatement. This card is so unbelievably pushed. So basically, it does everything that you would want all those innate abilities to do, and it just gives everything to you at an insane costed commander. A 4/3 flying trample with no other text on it shouldn't even cost 4. And yet this one does. It's crazy. And the idea that you can play that card this turn, you see that all the time with the red impulsive draw effects. The fact that you can play it, and it does get around Drannith Magistrate, because Drannith Magistrate specifically says opponents can only cast spells from their hand, not play lands, not play cards. They can only cast spells. So this play land effect does get around Drannith Magistrate. So you could still hit your land drops if you have Drannith on the battlefield. And the idea that, it's your next instep versus just you may play that card this turn is also unbelievably powerful. So you could just stack up more and more cards in your exile zone and play them. It's unbelievable. It's so powerful. Like this, I guess this is what they were hoping to sell that Aftermath set with, because it's an amazing card. It really is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the main thing that you run into when you see this card, you ask yourself, okay, losing exactly 1 life. That was the thing I asked myself when I first saw the card. I was like, okay, this card looks cool, but how often is Ob Nixilis going to trigger? Like, obviously, you can do a lot of work to trigger him yourself, and I think we're going to talk a bit about that later. But the real strength of Ob Nixilis, from what I found so far, is just you would be astounded how many things in CEDH kind of have like lose 1 life or pay 1 life kind of tacked onto it as like an additional quote unquote like cost to make it, make your life a little bit harder, right? So here's a couple examples for you. Number 1, fetches. Fetches, you have to pay 1 life to activate them. Boom, I have an Ob Nixilis trigger. Talismans, a lot of people play the talisman artifact cycle, tap it for a colorless, or pay a life and tap it to get 1 of 2 colors. Boom, trigger my Ob Nixilis. Both City of Brass and Mana Confluence, tap those cards, pay a life, make a mana of any color. Boom, activate my Ob Nixilis. A lot of, attackers that people just like to chip around with, a shocking amount of them just have 1 power. Yeah, I'll hit you for 1. You're the Ad Nos player. Hey, that guy lost 1 life. All right, trigger my Ob Nixilis. Much in the same vein of attacking. If Timna, you only attack one of your opponents, go to your second main phase. Oh, I'll lose 1 life, draw 1 card. Oh, you lost 1 life, trigger my Ob Nixilis. And then there's other stuff as well, like of course Necropotence, and even the best card in the Lord of the Rings set, which we accidentally left off of our top 5 cards in Lord of the Rings set, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. Whenever somebody casts a second spell, lose 1 life, create a treasure token. I think that'll come up a lot because everyone's really high on that card. Be playing against Lotho. Boom, lose a life. All right, I'll trigger my Ob Nixilis.
Yeah, and the list just goes on and on. Like, it's unbelievable how often it happens. Mana Vault in your draw step.
Yeah, Mana Vault too, yeah.
And just like all the other ones you listed, you'd be surprised how often you do that. How often you lose exactly 1. Because it seems like a weird limitation, but it just comes up so often. It gets to the point where you're like, I don't want to attack.
Yeah.
Because like my Timna, I'm like, oh, I'll attack you with my little do nothing, bozos or whatever. And I don't want to now because you have Ob Nixilis on the battlefield. Not because of you, but like because of my opponents, and I can't trigger my Timna because of it. It's so powerful.
Yep. And it is so funny. Like, we incidentally have just packed our decks full of these effects because we need the power. And, we have 40 life. People make jokes about like, oh, guess I'm going to pay the big 1 life into my fetch land. Oh, going all the way to 39. Woohoo, that's crazy. And so Ob Nixilis does really get to like incidentally kind of attack that line of the format quite well, which is pretty awesome. And since he's getting triggered all that often, there are a lot of times where you'll cast Ob Nixilis, just pass the turn, not do anything to trigger him on your turn, and you'll come around and you'll have 3 or 4 cards in exile to work with. and you have an 8/7 commander. Commander damage is a thing in this format. The obvious draw of this is like you get the pseudo draw of exiling the top card of your library and getting to play it until your next turn. But it also does say put a +1/+1 counter on Nixilis. Ryan was already freaking out about a 4/3 flying trample for 4. How about an 8/7? How about a 12/11? That happens before you know it.
It happens very quickly. Like how fast that card becomes absolutely just astoundingly big, and it flies and tramples. So even if you have a Birds of Paradise, it's hitting you for the it's just gonna run over it. Like nothing is safe, even if you just 2 people fetch to land in a turn cycle. Now your Sarah Ascendant can't even block it effectively.
Yep.
Like it's insane how powerful that is. It's just such a it's a great card. I can see why you definitely gravitated towards it. I think there's a lot of power in it. So speaking of that, let's get into the deck list itself. So tell us what the overarching game plan is of this deck, and then we'll kind of dig into some more of the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely the overarching game plan of the deck is like kind of most other Rakdos decks. When you're playing red and black in CEDH, you do incidentally get to play pretty much all of the best like aggressive spells in the format. You get to play the best tutors, so you can go and find your win cons. You get to play Dockside Extortionist. You get to play Underworld Breach. You get to play Necropotence. You get to play Yawgmoth's Will, even if you want to, all that kind of stuff. You get to play Final Fortune and all that kind of stuff to take extra turns to fit in that win. So at its base, this is definitely an aggressive list. This is trying to win really quick, really fast. And then in a lot of games, in a lot of their opening hands that you look at, Ob Nixilis is like almost a backup plan. You're like, all right, if I don't immediately win off of, this kind of a little bit sketchy Underworld Breach line that we're going to try, well then, yeah, let's just cast Ob Nixilis and draw 4 cards a turn cycle and try again, right? So that's kind of definitely the overarching plan there. Because you're playing Rakdos. You want to start out the game by vampiric tutoring to put a mana crypt on top of your library, so you have the mana to cast Dockside into Grinding Station, into Underworld Breach, and then just go from there. That's what you want to be doing a lot of the games, and the deck can do it over and over again. That is the strength of having black in your deck. Especially you get to play Diabolic Intent, Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, even Grim Tutor, Imperial Seal. Shockingly decent in this deck, since you can put something on top of your library and then immediately activate your Ob Nixilis to trigger your Ob Nixilis to draw that card. So that's kind of the overarching plan, if that makes sense, Ryan.
Yep. And what I think is really cool is that this deck doesn't require your commander to win the game. It's not a combo piece in the command zone. So if for some reason somebody does Draneth, or somebody does do something to make it so that you can't have access to Ob Nixilis, your game isn't over. You're just pivoting to a different thing. You're like, okay, now I'm going to go into an Underworld Breach pile or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super powerful too. It's an insane advantage engine, a huge clock on the table, and it's not necessary to win the game. Nope. Those are everything that we want in a commander. It's so good.
And I haven't mentioned this entire time, but another big thing that drew me to it that I haven't even mentioned yet, and we'll talk more about it in depth later, he is part of an A plus B combo, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yep. Cool. So let's start to dig into some of the nitty gritty here. So we have a couple of different main categories that we're going to talk about for this particular deck list. The deck list is in the show notes in the YouTube description below, so check it out. It's really awesome. So we're going to kind of go through some main things like the advantage engines, how we win the game specifically, like some of the combo lines, as well as some pros and cons for all of you out there who may want to give this deck a shot. But let's start off with the advantage engines. So Cal, run us through some of the advantage engines, why they're advantage engines, why they were chosen maybe over some other stuff. Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like I said, kind of when we were talking about Ob Nixilis, it is shockingly easy for your opponents to do your work for you. But we've already talked about that. Your opponents are really good at losing one life all on their own to play their good cards. But what can we do to make our opponents lose one life? And first up, number one on the list is a card you have probably never heard of in your life, but it is the best card in this deck for your plan. This is Cataract Parasite. It will cost you a single black mana. It is a creature horror, and it's also a 1/1, which can be relevant in combat. It's a little bit fragile, but it can deal 1 damage to your opponents in combat. Woohoo! But it reads, whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, like Nixilis, Captive Kingpin, you may have Cataract Parasite deal 1 damage to that player. Draw step, boom, trigger my Nixilis. Your Ristic Study, boom, trigger my Nixilis. Your Tim to trigger, boom, trigger my Nixilis. You're really digging for cards, boom, 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 trigger my Cataract Parasite 3 times. Boom, trigger my Nixilis 3 times. So the floor on Cataract Parasite is that if it stays on the battlefield, you will trigger your Nixilis 3 times per turn cycle just off of your opponent's draw steps. The ceiling is absolutely astronomical. It's unreal. You will deal a shocking amount of damage to your opponents just off of Cataract Parasite. Your Nixilis will become huge in no time. You will exile half your library. No, not actually half your library. You will exile an astounding amount of cards. There's basically no more powerful effect in CEDH than drawing cards beyond, resolving Underworld Breach with an LED in hand to win the game. Yeah, but so many decks out there are just trying to draw cards so they can play their powerful spells. And Cataract Parasite says, hey, every time you draw a card, I'm going to be drawing a card too. And my massive commander is going to get even bigger. There's no better advantage engine in this deck than Cataract Parasite. And the ability to play such a unique card and have it do such great things for me is just like part of what makes this deck so awesome. I just get to cast Cataract Parasite and my opponents are like, can I read that card? I'm like, yeah, you're going to lose to it. Here you go.
Yeah, you better get familiar with it.
Yep.
The fact that it's a 1-drop is so huge, first of all, Cataract Parasite. And each is a separate trigger. So, like, if something deals X damage to you or something like that, but it only happens in 1 instance, that is 1 damage through Nixilis, therefore it's 1 trigger. But if it's like 3 damage or something like that, Nixilis doesn't trigger. If somebody resolves a wheel with a Cataract Parasite on the battlefield, each draw is a separate trigger.
Yep.
Therefore, each one is a single life loss. Therefore, each one is an Nixilis trigger.
Yep.
It's so good.
Yeah, Wheel of Fortune plus Cataract Parasite in this deck, pretty decent. I'll take a look at 28 cards.
20. I'll discard my hand, draw 7, and exile 21 that I can play until my next end step.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just game.
Try not to win off of that one. Yeah,
game.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Cataract Parasite is the obvious far and away winner. And I think the card that comes in at number 2 is a card that we did talk about a lot in our Lord of the Rings top 5 podcast episode last week. And that is Orcish Bowmasters. Since we recorded that episode, I've come a little bit down on Orcish Bowmasters. I think it's a very good card. I think it'll be a pretty good black staple that you should probably be playing in your black decks. I don't think it's going to break the format in half. I never thought it was going to break the format in half, but let me tell you, in this deck, it is pretty dang good because you know what Orcish Bowmaster does? It deals 1 damage. It punishes card draw, much like Cataract Parasite. My opponents are drawing cards. Cool. Ping you. I'll quote unquote draw a card off my Nixilis as well. And then I'll even amass Orcs 1. So yeah, let me read Orcish Bowmasters to you really quick yet again. It's a colorless in a black. It has flash, so you can bring it in at instant speed. It is a 1/1 Orc Archer. And then whenever it enters the battlefield, very relevant, because if I cast it, I will just get an Nixilis trigger off of it. When it enters the battlefield and whenever an opponent draws a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target. In this deck, it's always going to be somebody's face, pretty much. And then I will amass Orcs 1, which is just create in a continually larger orc army token is all that does. But Orcish Bowmasters, pretty good in a lot of the decks that people are playing these days. Orcish Bowmasters, an incredible value engine in Nixilis Captive Kingpin.
Yeah, the one thing that kind of actually puts Parasite above it is that Orcish Bowmasters does not trigger in somebody's first draw of their draw step.
Yeah.
So whenever they draw a card for turn, you don't get that trigger, but you do get it with Cataract. It does on their draw step normally. And Orcish Bowmasters, we've talked about it to death. Just see our last podcast up here in the corner or in the show notes or whatever. It's a very good card, and there's no arguing that. And having it in this deck absolutely is so good, because if you do want to deal with a problem creature, you can, but most of the time you're just going to people's face and just getting another draw off of it, get that exile effect.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the truly awesome thing about this. I almost wish that I could just like keep the amass orcs. Like I almost just wish I could keep the orc army as a 1/1. Cause like, just trying to chip in with people over and over again in my combat step to draw more cards. That seems fine.
I'll take it 8/8 instead. Oh, darn.
Yeah, exactly. And then next up, another card that we have talked about quite a bit recently. That's Urabrask from March of the Machines. Another great new card that just so happens to slot into this deck. That is 2 and double red. Legendary creature, Phyrexian Predator. Happens to be a 4/4 with first strike. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Urabrask deals 1 damage to target opponent. How exciting. And you add a red mana. And then, of course, like the rest of this Praetor cycle, if you jump through a lot of hoops, you can turn it into a saga. Not really relevant in CEDH 99% of the time, so I'll just go ahead and skip that. But casting instant sorcery spells, a great thing that you love to do. Adding red mana, sounds great to me. Cherry on top, deal 1 damage to an opponent, trigger my Nixilis. Urabrask has been a card that a lot of red X decks were already very excited about adding, kind of just so they could have like a second Bergy God of Storytelling effect, add red mana when you cast your spells. But this one brings even more upside for me. Urabrask has been awesome. The one time I've cast it, I actually haven't gotten many chances to cast Urabrask in my playing of this deck so far, but it does everything you want to do right on the tin.
Yeah, I call this card Bergy if she's having a really bad day.
Yeah.
That's what I call it. But basically, it also add red. That's really powerful too. So you can just keep on going. So you have the mana to cast the cards that you are exiling currently. So it's super powerful. Urabrask is good. I don't like that they call it Urabrask because there's 5 cards called.
Yeah. That's what they did with all of the Praetors in March of the Machine. They finally just named them only their name. But yeah, when we've been spending all of our time for the last 5, 6, 8 years, you saying, Urabrask means the card that no one ever plays in EDH. Elish Norn means the card that wipes your board and pumps the other team. That kind of stuff does get confusing over time. I get it.
Yep. But it is a very powerful card.
Mm-hmm.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
And moving on, another great little advantage engine in here is some Hour of Devastation draft chaff you maybe have never heard of unless you are a really big Pauper Cube fan. This used to be a Pauper Cube All-Star. I'm not sure if it is anymore. It says Firebrand Archer, a colorless and a red creature, human archer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Firebrand Archer deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it's a 2/1. Of note, like I kind of said up at the top of the episode, Firebrand Archer dealing 1 damage to each opponent. Ob Nixilis does read whenever 1 or more opponents each lose exactly 1 life, do the Ob Nixilis thing. So Firebrand Archer will only trigger Ob Nixilis once because 1 or more, which is to say all of your opponents are losing that 1 life. But getting to trigger Ob Nixilis anytime you cast a non-creature spell is very strong, considering this deck plays, 30, nearly 40 non-creature spells. So a lot of the stuff that we're playing in this deck will incidentally trigger Firebrand Archer, which will then also, of course, trigger Ob Nixilis. And, it's also kind of shocking in CEDH games. A lot of decks do actually kind of care about their life total. If they're playing black, a lot of the decks do. And Firebrand Archer over a turn or two can, shave a shocking amount of life off of people, deal an extra 4, 5, 6 damage to the entire table, can actually have a shocking effect on like the kind of overall texture of the game if people do care about using their life total for advantage. So Firebrand Archer does have that little bit of upside as well.
What I like about Firebrand Archer is it says non-creature. So this is every mana rock. This is every enchantment. This is those types of things. Whereas Urabrask only says instant or sorcery.
Instant or sorcery, yeah.
This, the Firebrand is every non-creature spell you cast. So long as it does not have a creature type, you are good to trigger Firebrand Archer, which is so good during something like, I don't know, an Underworld Breach line or something. It's like you just, even if you're just doing a loop or something like that and not really finding your win con yet, you are exiling your, top card of your library. So you're digging farther and you're, dealing damage to your opponents. And that is super powerful in this deck. It's really, really good.
Exactly.
Very strong.
And there's a reason why, if you look throughout a lot of Magic the Gathering sets, kind of almost from Hour of Devastation and since, there has been a fairly common, you'll find a lot of variations upon Firebrand Archer, kind of almost. There's an uncommon in one of the newer Ravnica sets. There's a guy in a 3-drop in the one of the newer Innistrad sets. It's kind of a recurring theme for a red common or uncommon to kind of have this effect on it. Cast X kind of spell, deal 1 damage to each of your opponents. But Firebrand Archer is by far the most flexible. A lot of the other ones, cost 3 instead of 2, or only trigger off of instant and sorceries instead of all non-creatures and all that kind of stuff. So I have entertained putting other ones in here, but over time I have found, I absolutely need it to cost 2, and I absolutely need it to trigger off of, my 19 artifacts in addition to, my instants and sorceries as well. So Firebrand Archer is the only one in this deck that it kind of does that exact effect, except for this next card, which is Reckless Fireweaver. Not much to say about Reckless Fireweaver. It's also a 2-drop. It's a 1/3. It's a human artificer, and then it says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. This is the card in the entire list that I'm actually most on the fence about right now. In theory, it's really good. We do have 20 artifacts. We do make a shocking amount of treasures. So, this is really good. Reckless Fireweaver into Dockside Extortionist is definitely like the magical Christmas land. Play Dockside Extortionist, make even just like 5 triggers, boom, 5 Reckless Fireweaver triggers, draw 5 off Ob Nixilis. But Reckless Fireweaver, I wouldn't doubt if in a set or two it isn't in my deck anymore. But for now, it's here.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of these effects, and this is the time when I tell the world that this might sound like somewhat of a familiar deck of old, and that's from Rakdos, Lord of Riots. Yep. And Rakdos, Lord of Riots is 2 red and 2 black, and I'll just paraphrase really quick what it does. Basically, you can't cast it unless an opponent has lost life. And then your creature spells cost X less to cast, X colorless less, where it's the amount of life your opponents have lost this turn. So somebody will cast Rakdos, and they'll reduce the amount of life that people, they'll reduce their cost of their spells. They'll put something like Worm Coil Engine or Steel Hellkite or something in there. And the reason that I mention this is that I think what is inevitably going to start to bubble to the surface is, what about different pingers like Thermo Alchemist and stuff like that, and Plague Spitter that allows you to do a whole bunch of stuff and deals a bunch of damage to your opponents? Why aren't those types of things in here? And I would agree with you when you say that these are probably the best rates for these types of things. They're 2 mana value versus 3 mana value, like a lot of things are. They don't require you to tap to deal a damage, which is what things like Thermo Alchemist does. These are still creatures that can attack. Some of the other ones have things like Defender, their walls, if you will. And so I do agree that these are the best rates for those types of things, whereas the other ones, they cost like 3 to get off, and they take a while. Like, they take a turn rotation. You have to tap to do the damage, and so I definitely agree that these are probably some of the better bets in here.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the harder things about like brewing up something like this, is like striking that balance. Like, obviously, triggering Ob Nixilis is really good. It's what we've been talking about for 20 minutes now. Triggering Ob Nixilis is really strong, but also, there's a lot of really good spells you have to fit into this deck. We have to find room for all of our must-play instants of sorceries. We have to find room for all of our must-play artifacts. We have to find room for maybe some of the more awkward stuff that still wins us the game. We have to find room for, you got to play Dothy Voidwalker. You got to play Burgi. You got to play Urabrask helps us out. But obviously you have to play Ragavan. You got to play Opposition Agent. So we only have so many slots even here that can be dedicated to our kind of like commander specific stuff. So we got to make sure that we're using those slots to the best of our ability. And that's kind of why we've come down to just Firebrand Archer and maybe Reckless Fireweaver.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Kedrick Parasite's already in there too.
For sure.
But yeah.
For sure.
All right. Any more advantage engines you want to talk about?
There were 2 other things that I wanted to mention really quickly, which are just kind of like funny cards that you would only play in this deck. Number 1 of them is Prosper Tomebound, which is actually the Rakdos deck I was playing a lot before I picked up Ob Nixilis here. Prosper is kind of just the value engine. He's a 1/4 with Death Touch, which is very funny because you can kind of just get into the red zone with him and hit people, trigger Ob Nixilis. People don't want to block a 1/4 Death Toucher with any creature they care about. And then he also exiles a card on each of your end step, kind of like Ob Nixilis does. You can play it until the end of your next turn. But then he also says whenever you play, including your lands, a card from exile, create a treasure token. So in this deck, Prosper is kind of almost like another Burgi effect or another Urabrask effect, in that when you're casting spells, you're getting a small refund on mana. And this one's the best one, honestly, because you get a treasure token every time you do it. That's just gas. Not much else to say about Prosper. And then one last really funny little card. It's less of an advantage engine, but I just have to talk about it because it's so funny in this deck. That is the forever very widely played in a lot of Eternal formats, but less so now than it used to be, Grape Shot. Colorless in a red, sorcery. Grape Shot deals 1 damage to any target storm. So you're not killing people off Grape Shot in this deck, but what you are doing is, I'm going to cast my mana rocks. Ooh, Storm 1, Storm 2. Oh, I'm going to cast this little creature. Oh, Storm count 3. And, well, I've got enough mana left to Grape Shot, so let's draw 4 cards and see what happens. For 2 mana, trigger my Ob Nixilis 4 times, 5 times. This card has always overperformed for me. When I first looked at the deck list and saw what other people were doing with the deck, I was like, yeah, sure. Grape Shot seems cute. That seems fun. It has always overperformed, but it's not going to be winning you the game.
It's still a really cool card, though. Because it storms, so each of the triggers are separate instances. Yep. That's a really good
and people, if they're countering your spells or whatever, interacting with you, and then you just kind of get to cast Grape Shot and try again, their counter spells do up your storm count. So if people are trying to interact with you and stuff, they will just be making your Grape Shot better.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so now we've talked about advantage engines. We've talked about the commander and how awesome it is and how big it gets and how crazy it is. Let's talk about how you close out the game. How do you win the game with this deck?
Yeah, so this deck, like I said at the top of the show, it's kind of a Rakdos pile, which means that actually we don't get to play a lot of like the preeminent win cons. Like, sure, we get to play Underworld Breach, which if you've played CEDH a lot, you know how powerful Underworld Breach is. That's a colorless and a red enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. So it just lets you recycle a ton of stuff from your graveyard. The way you can win with that in this is kind of like you can use Grinding Station, which is an artifact that lets you sacrifice an artifact to mill 3 cards, and then whenever an artifact comes into play, untap Grinding Station. You combine that with like a 0-cost rock to kind of just mill your entire graveyard, mill your entire deck. You put most of your deck into exile, but then it's relatively easy to like from that point make infinite mana and then like assemble another win con or whatever. One of those other win cons that you will be assembling, maybe like the easiest way to win in this game is Dualcaster Mage plus Twin Flame. How that works is you cast the card Twin Flame, targeting any creature you control. Twin Flame is a colorless and a red. It technically has Strive. You never cast it with that. Choose any number of target creatures you control. For each of them, create a token that is a copy of that creature, except it has haste. Exile those tokens at the beginning of the next end step. So you cast Twin Flame, targeting any creature. So you do have to control a creature, but that's not that hard. Hold priority, and then you flash in Dualcaster Mage. Dualcaster Mage is a colorless red. It's a 2/2. That's not that relevant. It has flash, obviously, and then when it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So you have it enter, you have it make a copy of Twin Flame. Your copy of Twin Flame targets your Dualcaster Mage. Your new Dualcaster Mage comes in, it makes a copy of the original Twin Flame. Oh, would you look at that? And so then you can make infinite, hasty 2/2s, which you can use to kill the table. That's definitely the most common way. Maybe the second most common way. I mentioned up top, there is an A plus B combo in this deck. I'm playing another very unique card. And that is the enchantment All Will Be One. It'll cost you 3 and double red, so it is a little bit pricey. And since it's an A plus B combo with your commander Ob Nixilis, you do already have to have Ob Nixilis on the field. All Will Be One reads, whenever you put one or more counters on a permanent or player, All Will Be One deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. So it deals damage to any target that is not a battle, because they couldn't put that on the card yet, because when I guess they didn't want to say non-battle target or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, whenever one or more counters are put on a permanent or player, well, the counters are put on a battle, then you can instantly defeat the battle.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
yeah, why
exactly.
That's there.
They didn't want you to instantly kill a battle. Yeah, which it makes sense.
It
but
does.
How this works with Ob Nixilis is, well, you have to trigger Ob Nixilis once All Will Be One is on the battlefield. So you put a +1/+1 counter on Ob Nixilis. Oh, this triggers your All Will Be One. All right, we've put one counter onto a permanent or player that we control. So, let's deal 1 damage to pretty much any target. Oh, that triggers our Ob Nixilis. And so you can see how this loop works. Put a counter on Ob Nixilis, deal 1 damage with All Will Be One, etc., etc. The one very small downside to this that I'm not exactly sure how people would exploit is that at the end of it, your entire library will be exiled to Ob Nixilis. So if through some way people can force you to draw a card, you will lose the game. But we're not playing Esper Sentinel. Obviously, we don't have Crom. Those are the 2 main ways that effect gets, quote-unquote, people. There's not really any way I can think of that people can force you to draw a card, but if it comes up, you will lose the game.
Yeah, I'm sure someone out there has some niche effect. Mm-hmm. Like, I think there's a Baleful Mastery or something like that makes somebody...
Baleful Mastery is a forced draw, I believe, yeah.
Who's running that? Seriously.
My old Prosper deck, actually.
All right, you got me.
Yeah, decks that desperately need removal, I guess.
Yeah, the only thing is like the only thing you could do is maybe swap this to stop the loop, and then it'll just start again once the loop starts again. Like the moment a damage is
one more
done.
time. Oh no,
yeah. You just have to trigger Ob Nixilis again. So you redirect that to the All Will Be One trigger to something else, and that's the only way you can stop it. But then you just trigger it again. It's so powerful. They printed this.
Yeah, right.
All Will Be One,
right next
and
to
then
each
immediately aftermath had Rakdos in it. Yep. I'm sorry, had Ob Nixilis in it. They knew what they were doing. Like
it's very
they're
funny.
Literally printing them side by side.
It's very funny. It's very fun.
And it's so easy to pull off. It's a 2-card combo with your commander.
Yeah. Exactly. It's not hard at all to do. And then the final kind of win cons that we have in here is Dockside Extortionist plus Cloudstone Curio. Cloudstone Curio is a bit more of a niche artifact. It costs 3, and it reads, whenever a non-artifact permanent enters the battlefield under your control, you may return another permanent you control that shares a permanent type with it to its owner's hand. So what you do with this is you cast Dockside Extortionist, you make a decent amount of treasures, hopefully, and then you cast another creature that hopefully costs less than like the amount of treasures you control. That hopefully Dockside plus this creature, its mana is less than the amount of treasures you make. So you cast Dockside, and then you follow it up with another creature. This other creature enters the battlefield. Cloudstone Curio triggers. Oh, I'll bounce my Dockside back to my hand, and now I'll recast my Dockside Extortionist, make more treasures, bounce the other creature back to my hand. This is a relatively simple infinite mana loop. And then from there, if Orcish Bowmasters is the other thing, if bouncing, you can just kill your opponents with that off of making only 4 treasures off of a Dockside Extortionist. If your Dockside only makes you 3 treasures, you can win the game off of Voldarin Epicure, which deals a damage to each opponent when it enters the battlefield. So you just bounce that Dockside, kill everybody. But you can also go through a little more complicated lines. Make infinite treasures, use those treasures into Magda to go and get Wishclaw Talisman, use Wishclaw Talisman to tutor up anything that wins the game, so on and so forth. Those are all the kind of ways that this deck can win the game. And they're all a little bit awkward. They're all a little bit weird, but that's what we get when we're not playing, we're not playing blue. So we can't just exile an entire library and then slam Thassa's Oracle. We're not playing, in the same vein as we're not playing blue, we can't easily use Underworld Breach to empty our entire library with Brain Freeze and then follow it up with Thassa's Oracle, So a lot of the most efficient ways of winning the game with some of the cards we already have present in our deck are just incidentally missing because of our colors. And I think it's a great transition into the pros and cons of Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin.
Yep. So basically, what are the pros and cons? Why would somebody want to play this? Or what are some cons about this? Which might steer some people away from playing it, which, because it might not be their style or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely want to go into the cons here first. And that's the number one con. A lot of your win cons are kind of awkward. A lot of them are A plus B combos, but they also have caveats. You can win with Dockside Extortionist and Cloudstone Curio plus a box of rocks, but your Dockside kind of has to, usually you want it to make 5 treasures. And there's some games where that's just not the case. You can win the game with Dualcaster Mage and Twin Flame if you happen to have both of them in hand. And
3 red pips.
And a lot of red mana, and you have a creature on the battlefield, and it's your first main phase. You can't win the game with Dualcaster Twin Flame if it is your second main phase, because you have to be able to go to combat to use all your hasty guys. You can win the game with Ob Nixilis and All Will Be One, and that's definitely the least awkward one, but it's still 5 mana is a lot, and you already have to have Ob Nixilis out. And
so it's 9 mana, and you have to ping something.
And you also have to find a way to immediately trigger Ob Nixilis, or else you do open a window of just being like, well, now that I have my winning game combo on the board, I'm going to pass to my opponent. And if they happen to ping themselves, I'll win the game, which gives your opponents a lot more of a chance to interact with you and whatnot as well.
Yeah, so if you want to do it right then and there, it's actually more like 10 mana.
Yeah, exactly. So number one con, definitely the win cons are a little awkward. Having Underworld Breach is a great boon, because if you put an Underworld Breach into play, you can usually figure out a way to win the game. It's just a lot more awkward than we get in a lot of other decks.
So what about the pros?
Well,
why would somebody want to play this deck?
I do actually have one more con, Ryan, which is that like I've alluded to more than once, missing white and or blue does kind of stink. There's a reason why like Sans Green 4-color is the thing that a lot of people gravitate towards. Blue gets you Mystic Remora, it gets you Rhystic Study, it gets you a lot of interactive spells, it gives you Thassa's Oracle, which just kind of makes your life so much easier for a lot of these win cons. And then missing white, since we're Rakdos, we do open ourselves to interaction a lot. And since we don't have blue, you know, we a lot of times we just kind of have to like jam a win and pray that nobody has anything, you know. So if we at least had white, you know, I think that's why a lot of the non-blue believers have gravitated towards Mardu, because if you don't have at least have blue, you can also have white, and you can cast silence, and you can have Grand Abolisher to stop people from casting stuff on your turns, and you can do the same with Ranger Captain of Eos and whatnot. So white brings you a lot of that different kind of interactive where you just say, yeah, you're not casting spells on my turn, I'm going to win now. And everybody's like, you got us. So missing both white and blue does stink.
Yeah, it's interesting that you actually mentioned white, you know, white and blue. Because I get blue all day long.
Yeah.
I understand that, like counter spells and interaction and stuff. But like missing white is like, you didn't even mention green. I'd be like, whatever. Yeah, what am I going to get? Veil of Summer?
Yeah,
Blah,
exactly.
you know?
It's like, ooh, my mana dorks help me cast Nixilis on turn 2. Okay, I can cast them on turn 1 easily enough.
Yeah, that's definitely not a problem you had to solve. But white, you're right, is super powerful. The silence effects and
even have an Esper Sentinel would be nice. Yeah. Never bad to cast an Esper Sentinel.
White doesn't have a whole bunch of cards in CEDH, but boy, oh boy, are those cards powerful.
Exactly.
The ones that we are running. They're so powerful.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the pros. Why would anybody want to play this deck?
Yeah, so I think the main draw to this deck for sure is I do think that if you want to do kind of the explosive Rakdos thing, just try to maybe win as quickly as possible or present multiple win attempts over several turns, then now better than Florian, better than Prosper, Nixilis is kind of the de facto way to go here now, I would say. He's cheap. He's aggressive. He draws you, quote unquote, draws you a lot of cards just incidentally by your opponents playing the game. You can force yourself to trigger him even more. He is a scary card advantage engine in a color combination where what we were doing before was with Prosper. We're like, all right, let's try to exile cards with our other cards and maybe get some value. And ooh, he draws us a card on our end step. And with Florian, we were going, all right, well, we get to look at a bunch of cards after combat and then choose one of them, you know, where Nixilis just says, all right, here, have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cards a turn cycle with little to no issue. That's scary. That's powerful. That's very cool. And I think that's in the same vein. He's triggering so much and drawing you so many cards. He does kind of have the alternate win condition. I didn't talk about it earlier, but there is a very real win condition here of commander damage. Before you know it, he is a 9 something, and then you hit somebody, and then he's a 10 something, and you hit somebody, and then before you know it, you can come around to a turn, and you can say, I can just choose one of my opponents to die right now. If one of my opponents is looking a little scary, I could just remove them from the game. So
yeah, you could two-shot people.
Yep, two-shot people with little to no issue. Yeah. And so that's definitely a very cool alternate angle about this deck that I think could definitely draw you to it, and it's a pro. And, you know, I think it's just plain cool. You get to play a lot of cards that people will never think of. Cataract Parasite, All Will Be One. You're casting Voldaren Epicure in a CEDH deck, and you're happy about it. You know, I think that's a pretty sweet spot. So if you're, it's just another pro. It's spicy, it's funny, it's cool, it's fun to work on. So I think those are definitely some of the pros.
Awesome.
So all of these things and many more, I think, kind of add up to why Nixilis Captive Kingpin is my new favorite CEDH deck, Ryan.
Very cool. All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? Anything you want to tell all the listeners out there about Nixilis, or anybody who might be possibly interested in maybe trying it out?
Yeah, basically, I'd just say don't be afraid to jam it. Just have a fun time. Just go crazy. You want to be as aggressive as possible, I think, in 95% of the games. You're probably the most, to use a term that a lot of people use, you're probably the most parasitic deck at the table, which is kind of like you don't actually care what your opponents are doing unless they're damaging themselves. You're just trying to do your thing and you're trying to win. So just try to win. Keep those hands that maybe win with a specific line with Underworld Breach on turn 1. Keep the hands that cast Nixilis plus Cataract Parasite. It'll work out, I promise. Yeah, just try. I would encourage you to try it out. I mentioned this in private the other day to some people, but just having this new deck that I'm excited about has kind of reignited my love for CEDH. You know, obviously I was very passionate about Temur Pirates for a long time, and I am, but one man can only be excited about one deck for so long. So it's been nice to have a new deck to try out, get excited about, talk to people about, change cards in, jam in games, etc., etc. So if you're a little bit of a slump, maybe this weirdo guy with his chair power stance is what you need to get back into it.
That's awesome. Super great to hear it. All right, to the listeners, how do you feel about Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin? Do you think that it might be a cool commander to try out? Have you already tried it out? What has been your experience with it under your control or under an opponent's control? We would love to hear that from you. Let us know. Reach out to us on social media, all that good stuff. Make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much it helps us out. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, so many other things. We're basically everywhere.
Yeah, find us on Facebook.
Yeah, find us on Facebook. We're in your closet, so just open your closet. We're probably there too. So
all links are in the episode.
Yeah, I'm in your walls. I'm in your internet, clogging your tubes. Yeah, all links for all that nonsense is in the episode show notes. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk about our favorite format and our favorite game, Magic: The Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.